dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Men Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Men Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you are dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Men Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Men Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Men Thinkin.
Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in Internet conservative. TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WBDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Happy to be with you. I want to start by talking about something that I did not speak of before the fact. I just don't normally deal with things that I consider serious as anniversaries before they occur. And that something is Veterans Day, or what we call Veterans Day, which is a total misnomer, where we celebrate all veterans, whether they fought in combat or whatever. And don't get me wrong, I do believe that it is good for the nation to remember who protects their freedoms. I don't have a problem with that. I think it's great. But we really have missed the point of what Veterans Day is. It's not Veterans Day. It's Armistice Day. Because on November 11th, in the year 1918, and I believe it was 11 o'clock in the morning, 11 o'clock a.m., on the 11th of November of 2018, an armistice was signed that ended military hostilities associated with the First World War. The First World War was horrific. It didn't have the same reach that the Second World War, which would follow it less than 3 decades later, didn't have the same killing, didn't have the same scope, didn't have the same technology, but it was an horrific occurrence that affected most of the globe. The men who fought in that war experienced things that had been unheard of in combat before. The idea that someone would use a chemical agent that if you inhaled it would literally eat your insides and cause you to die. Being dug in a foxhole in a trench, separated not by very much distance. The whole term of no man's land came from the distance between the trenches at the battlefronts in World War I. Because if you went out there, somebody was going to definitely kill you. Being dug in and seeing just scores of men sacrificed for objectives that sometimes could not even be held. This was the war to end all wars. Obviously, it did not do that. But on that day, the armistice was signed. The city of Berlin was seized by revolutionists. The new chancellor at that time was begging for order, and the ousted Kaiser fled to Holland. But more importantly, men from many countries who had come together in war could now put down their arms and go home. And because of what they did, even though America was late entering the war, America was never the first to be involved in any world war, either of them. Because of what occurred, for me, I find the idea of celebrating this day kind of disingenuous. First, again, as I said, there was the name. It's not Veterans Day at all. It's the anniversary of the armistice that ceased World War I. I served in the military. I did my time. And though I did serve, I never had the honor, and I do consider it an honor, of combat service. I did not go into a battle setting or a war zone on behalf of my country while I wore the country's uniform. So I have no personal experience of being subject to random execution at any time. And while simultaneously looking to subject anybody on the other side of this conflict to the same experience or fate. So I don't have that experience of how when you know you're getting ready to go into a firefight, there's a tenseness, your insides tighten. The closest thing I can say to that was maybe getting ready to play a football game, a big football game. There's a lot on the line, or so it seemed. And you'd have this tenseness and you'd have all this nervousness and anxiety. But nobody was thinking they were going to die. If you move that over to combat, that must be very intense. I don't know what it's like to have that type of feeling to the point where you don't sleep. When you know that there's someone looking to kill you every waking moment, every moment of the day, whether you're awake or not, sleeping moments become few and fleeting, if you are interested in surviving, that is. And to go through all that, to have the jubilant release of tension that comes from no longer being called to offer your life or to take anyone else's life on behalf of one's country. I don't have those experiences. Now, we do have people in America who do have those experiences, and we treat them horribly. Fortunately, we did not treat World War I veterans with the same level of disdain that we have treated veterans since Korea, to be honest. But though I haven't had those experiences, I can still relate and I can understand them. Now, again, I don't mind being thanked for my service. I have people, particularly those who've never served, who are being politically correct. Personally, I just think they're being politically correct. I don't think they're insincere. But I don't mind being thanked for my service. But November 11th never was, is not now, nor will it ever be about any time that I spent in uniform. I don't believe we have any U.S. soldiers from World War I still with us. I believe they've gone on. If we did have them, then I would see November 11th as a day to celebrate them, because they went through that experience, came out the other side, and as a result, the world was spared a particular fate that you would not have wanted to experience. But they're not with us anymore. So as it is, November 11th, Armistice Day, is a solemn day for me in which I recall the end of sacrifices made to maintain a liberty that I was not even alive to defend for myself. And this is the very reason that I love my country. It is the fact that there have throughout the history of this country been men who never knew me, including those who would never embrace me if they knew me. Maybe because of my religion. I'm Christian, but not everybody likes Christians. And more likely in this country, possibly because of my skin color. They would never embrace me. They didn't know me. If they had known me, they wouldn't have liked me. But they knew what they were doing, and they knew that people like me would benefit. And they went and fought and died simply so people like me and others whom they may have liked more. They fought and they died so those folks might live in liberty. See, for people who do not understand my lack of a problem with white people, because a lot of black people can't handle it if you don't hate white people, if you don't have some type of animosity toward them. I don't have animosity toward too many people. Most of the people for whom I have animosity are the blacks who won't look at and resolve black problems. I don't have an issue with whites who are not solving problems that are not theirs. But what I was driving at is this. I don't have a big animosity toward white people because this is what I know. White people who didn't care about black folks ended black slavery. It wasn't a great love for black people. It was simply the idea that it was wrong. And because they ended something that was wrong, even though they didn't necessarily care for the people who were suffering the wrong, I don't have to endure it. That is a definition of love that people don't get, because if you really understood the love God has for people, you would understand that white people have shown love. Because God doesn't like us. He loves us. He hates what we do. He's not crazy about who we are. But love is simply doing what is in someone else's best interest, no matter how you feel about it. And all those hundreds of thousands of soldiers who fought to end slavery in the United States showed love for me, even though they would never know me. All those men who died face down in the mud in Europe during World War I, who did the same in World War II, also dying on various islands throughout the Pacific, showed me a love that most people simply do not understand. We're not talking about affection. But the very reason I love my country is because somebody who would never know me and may not ever like me died so that I would not have to live as someone else's slave. I cannot repay those men. they've passed on, and the debt that they left can only be paid forward. You can only fight now for the liberty of those who come behind you. You can fight for your own liberty, but you might die in that pursuit. But if you prevail in the battle, even if you perish, then someone in the next generation may still be able to breathe free. So I can't repay them. If there is a battle in which I can be engaged, I wouldn't shrink from it. I wouldn't be excited about it. But I would like to believe that I would be willing to pay a debt for someone else in the future in the same way a debt was paid for me in the past. But I can reflect on what they gave, which is the gift of and the duty to maintain liberty. Because of that, I do love those men, those veterans that I never knew. This is Armistice Day, is their day. I don't know that it will ever be mine, and I know that now it is not. I just want to remind people that the casual celebrations that we enjoy did not come about because of a casual effort on the part of Americans who knew full well that the people for whom they were fighting were not always just the people that they liked. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinkin', will be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force of Internet conservative, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Moving on from that very solemn piece, at least for me, the dead Kennedy legacy continues. Yes, I said dead, not Ted. And that is the attempt to allege your enemies into submission. And what I mean, of course, is you don't like somebody, you don't like their politics, you don't want them to be in public office, you don't want them to even be seriously considered for public office, not only now, but into the future as well. You want to destroy them personally, and therefore you bring forth allegations. And the allegations can be, well, to be honest with you, the more salacious, the more immoral, the more stunning and shocking, the better. What you're looking for is sensationalism. The one thing you do not need is truth. Among the latest victims of this political tactic, and let me say this before I really get into this, you need to understand this about progressives and the reason they do what they do in this arena. Progressives consider the law a weapon of politics, not a safeguard of social order. And their preferred legal tactic is the public allegation. That's what they like. And they never intend to have this go so far as to go to trial. They expect that you, when faced with this onslaught of negative information, will simply fold your tent and go away. And the reason they don't expect it to go to trial is not because they're not willing, but they don't expect that anybody would allow it to go on that long and have their name just dragged and dragged, that they would eventually just give up. And to go to trial just to give up means not only are we going after your reputation, we're now going to drain your finances. So, wow, yeah, we're really going to destroy you. That is the progressive game plan. Now, the most recent victim of this, or one of the more recent victims of this, is Judge Roy Moore, who is running for Senate in a special election in Alabama, which I believe will take place in December the 5th, if I'm correct. He just came out of a Republican primary where he beat Luther Strange, who had the endorsement of President Donald Trump. So Donald Trump did not prevail there. I do not know if Trump has endorsed Judge Roy Moore, but now the allegations have begun. We're talking about things from way back. Here is the bit. It really doesn't matter what they are. The only thing that really matters is that they're there, and that's all that progressives need. And Judge Roy Moore has come out, and I would say his handling of this has been uneven.
Now I want to address something that some people have come to hear about. These attacks involve a minor, and they're completely false and untrue about something that happened nearly 40 years ago. But more than being completely false and untrue, they're very hurtful to me personally. I want to make it clear to the media present and to the people present. I have not provided alcoholic beverages, beer, or anything else to a minor. I have not been guilty of sexual misconduct with anyone. This article is a prime example of fake news, an attempt to divert attention from the true issues which affect our country.
The nice thing about what the judge said is he did say they weren't true. The bad thing about what the judge said is he actually gave them oxygen by even going into any level of detail about what was alleged. Because once you go down that road, you're simply handing the ammunition back to the people who fired it at you in the first place. Oh, you didn't say, you say you didn't do this. Well, what about this other thing that they say you did? And it keeps going. And then eventually they'll pick up on the first thing. Well, if you say you didn't do this, but you said that something else happened here, what did you really mean? The game never ends. Now, someone who handled things particularly poorly, and he was not running for any political office, was Bill Cosby. And, of course, what we will get from Cosby is really just quintessential. All those women can't be lying. Seriously? Yes, they can. Yes, they can. Yeah, but he admitted this. And if it was real, here is the thing you have to really concern yourself with. I don't give a rat's behind what Bill Cosby did with whomever 20, 30, 40 years ago. Don't care. Well, if it were your daughter, that's the whole thing that comes up. But it wasn't. And the daughters that these people belong to didn't care enough to bring it up until 3-4 decades after the fact. Did you really think it was serious that you would sit on it? Oh, I cried about it. Really? Who saw you cry? Can we get some of those tears? Can we get some DNA to make sure that you shed tears back then and see that those tears were actually yours? Because that's about as reasonable as the allegations are. Bill Cosby handled it badly, not the least of which is because they finally threw enough stuff at him that there were some things that actually stuck, and he had to acknowledge them. Bless his heart. But his wife stood up for him, which is admirable in and of itself.
Can I ask you, if with the persona that people know about Bill Cosby, should they believe anything differently about what?
There is no comment about that.
Camille Cosby is standing by her man. In a statement obtained by NBC News, Bill Cosby's wife of 50 years insists that her comedian and sitcom star husband is the man that people thought they knew before nearly 24 women publicly accused Cosby of sexually assaulting him or attempting to decades ago.
There's a gap, I think, between people in time knowing what I do and really believing that I still do that, and they're wondering, well, what is it I really do. And
Camille's statement begins, I met my husband, Bill Cosby, in 1963, and we were married in 1964. The man I met and fell in love with, and whom I continue to love, is the man you all knew through his work. He is a kind man, a generous man, a funny man, and a wonderful husband, father, and friend. He is the man you thought you knew.
That was Camille Cosby's statement back in December of 2014. I like that she dealt with it appropriately while Bill fumbled around trying to explain. You never explain allegations. Now, people might recall that even though Bill was clumsy handling it in the court of public opinion, he did relatively well in the court of law. Another black man, this time someone who was indeed running for office, and who handled things badly and eventually succumbed to the pressure, was Herman Cain. And Cain did things his own way. And once the allegations came after him, he did respond back in, this is November of 2011, a year before the election.
I tried to remember if I recognized her, and I didn't. I tried to remember if I remembered that name, and I didn't. The charges and the accusations I absolutely reject. They simply didn't happen. They simply did not happen. You know, for decades, the American people have wanted a businessman in the White House and not just another politician. Because for decades, all that the politicians have been doing is just kicking the can down the road, trim a little bit here, trim a little bit there, when America's biggest problems simply got worse. Well, a businessman by the name of Herman Cain stepped forward. Here I am. But I know from the American people that I have talked with and I have spoken with over the past several months, we are not going to allow Washington or politics to deny me the opportunity to represent this great nation. And as far as these accusations causing me to back off and maybe withdraw from this presidential primary race, ain't going to happen. We will get through this. We will get through this. The fact is, these anonymous allegations are false, and now the Democrat machine in America has brought forth a troubled woman to make false accusations, statements, many of which exceed common sense. And they certainly exceed the standards of decency in America.
Of course they exceed the standards of decency in America. We're dealing with progressives. Herman Cain, of course, despite all that particular bravado and bluster, did withdraw from the race. The way they did it in 2011 to 2000, for that election cycle was, and they still do it that way. Oh, well, I'm suspending my campaign, and I believe they're doing that for federal election law reasons, so they can handle the money that they've received through donations a particular way. That's their business. I'm not faulting anyone for that. But the interesting thing about that is he said he was going to do one thing, he did not. But he also importantly identified part of the right tactic when he identified who was actually behind it. Democrats are going out and drumming up people to come after folks. Progressive Democrats do that. Sometimes non-progressive Democrats do that. It's just the way they operate. What I find very interesting is that this seems to be one-sided. Now, don't get me wrong. I do recognize that Anthony Weiner, who is a progressive Democrat, got caught because he was simply just egregious in what he did. It was ridiculous and silly. I do recognize that occasionally a Democrat will get caught, and I realize that Harvey Weinstein, who was never running for anything, finally went down after decades of an open secret, as it is described in Hollywood. But among the political heavyweights who happen to be progressives, I just wonder why these things never seemed to attach to them. For example, I still remember Bill Clinton in some White House briefing room, I guess, staring at a camera with that crooked finger. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. Well, he got impeached, so he never left office, and he's never had to answer. This is somebody who told a grand jury and was found to have perjured himself before a grand jury, a federal grand jury. He did this as a sitting president, and his line was, that depends on what the definition of is. Really? He got away with that, and people still applaud Bill Clinton when he shows up. The other person who has gotten away with ridiculous sexual behavior to the point where it is buried is Barack Hussein Obama. Barack Hussein Obama, if you believe the people who are willing to speak publicly, the ones who are still alive, Barack Obama's he's a raging homosexual. Has been for decades. Yeah, but he's married to this, that, and he's married and he's got children. And this is what Joan Rivers had to say about Barack and Michelle Obama before her interestingly timed demise.
Ms. Rivers, how are you? You made a ton of news officiating the wedding in New York yesterday. Is this like a new cottage career move for you?
I'm so excited, and I should do very well because I don't charge.
And do you think that the country will see the United States will see the first gay president or the first woman president?
We already have it with Obama, so let's just calm down.
Got it.
You know Michelle is a trans.
I'm sorry, she's a what?
A transgender. We all know.
Oh my gosh.
Oh gosh, it's okay. He does this.
That was interesting because CNN and others tried to play that as a joke. I don't believe she was joking at all. She believes, and she had reason to believe, that Barack Obama is homosexual. And that his wife was not born female. That's her statement. Interestingly, not long after that, she had surgery and died when death was not necessarily on the agenda for someone going through that type of surgery. Coincidence? I don't know. There's also people who remember Barack Hussein Obama when he didn't want to revel in his Kenyan heritage, which, based on the man for whom he's named, you could understand why he would not necessarily want to do that. This is a lady who knew him in Hawaii. Her name is Mia Marie Pope, and she appeared with Pastor David Manning on his program. Now, a lot of people feel about Pastor David Manning, but she showed up, and she did have something to say about Barack Obama.
I knew of this individual. His name was Barry Sotoro. And he always portrayed himself as a foreign student. And that didn't mean much to me then, but, that's just what we knew about him. And he wasn't really close within my particular circle of friends. He was a little bit older than me. And he very much was within sort of the gay community, which there is a thriving, even back then, gay community in that area, particularly the Diamond Head area. And we knew Barry as just common knowledge that, girls were never anything that he was ever interested in. And, as a young teenager, as a young girl, it was clear to me that Barry was strictly into men. Now, remember, this is the late 70s. This is before crack was invented, or if it was invented, we never saw it around. I never heard of it until the 80s. So this was... if you were going to do cocaine, it was like in the powder form, and it was very expensive. Well, here we are, a bunch of broke teenagers, and, in other words, for somebody to brag that they have this cocaine was, somewhat newsworthy within our little clique. And he probably was telling the truth, he would get with these older white gay men, and this is how we just pretty much had the impression that that's how he was procuring his cocaine. In other words, he was having sex with these older white guys, and that's how he was getting his cocaine to be able to freebase.
Well. So, Barack Obama was a teenaged cocaine prostitute, and his prostitution was with older white men as a teenager, a little bit older than Mia Marie Pope. Well, she doesn't know. She actually knew the person no less than these people are talking about Roy Moore, no less than they were talking about Bill Cosby, no less than they were talking about Herman Cain. Her knowledge is on the same level of the person of which she speaks, but you don't want to hear her. Why is that? Why is that? Why don't you want to hear Larry Sinclair, who has gone on record, lawyered up, and had big public announcements, press conferences, where he answered questions in detail about his numerous sexual encounters with one Barack Hussein Obama? Why don't you talk about that? Why do you miss that? Because this is a progressive thing. And they will suppress. They will deflect. Remember what they did with Joan Rivers' statement. She's joking. Why would you tell this joke? That's a terrible joke. She wasn't joking. You got to understand what this is about. The whole idea of this is to put somebody that you don't like on the defensive with the impossible burden of proving the negative. Well, prove you didn't do it. How are you going to prove you didn't do something? And since you're not the one accusing, since when does the burden of proof fall on anyone other than the accuser in these United States? If you say something about someone, it's up to you to prove it. It's not for them to prove that you're lying. It's for you to prove that your allegations are true. But we let progressivism get in here, and now we have this other thing going on. You have people put on the defensive just because someone had something to say. And I think that's ridiculous, but that's where we are. In the meantime, well, actually, for me, this goes back 20 years, 30 years, almost 30 years. When they went after Clarence Thomas, as he was going to be only the second black person on the Supreme Court in history. And dead Kennedy dug up Anita Hill. And that circus went on for days, and it was nationally televised, and it was some of the most ridiculous stuff I can remember hearing. But Clarence Thomas finally got things together in his head and laid out how you are really to respond to these type of discussions.
Did not occur.
When it came time for him to publicly respond to the allegations, Thomas turned the tables on his interrogators and, for all intents and purposes, ended the debate.
This is a circus. It's a national disgrace. It is a high-tech lynching for uppity blacks who in any way deign to think for themselves. And it is a message that unless you kowtow to an old order, you will be lynched, destroyed, caricatured by a committee of the U.S. Senate rather than hung from a tree.
This is how you're supposed to deal with things. Don't deal with the allegations. Deal with the ones behind them. Find who's putting them up to it and call them out. You have nothing. You know you have nothing. You disrespectful, poor excuses for human beings. You don't like my politics, so you're going to go out and invent some nonsense to try to embarrass me personally. And for Ted Kennedy, who killed a woman and never answered for it, and was the worst womanizer, to go out there and find a woman to come after Clarence Thomas is especially distasteful. You're going to have to wake up and smell the coffee here. These folks are not after the individuals. They're trying to silence people who might possibly think like you, so that the only people who have political power are those that think like them. And if you allow these people anything other than defeat when election time comes, you will never be free. Period. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Just going back to that last segment momentarily, on my page, my show page on Facebook, Diane Cooper, I want to give a shout out to her, made a comment dealing with these allegations that get made. She said, the left loves lawfare. Lawfare is a form of asymmetric warfare consisting of using the legal system against an enemy, such as by damaging or delegitimizing them, tying up their time, or winning a public relations victory. That's what they do. They're not trying to get to the truth. They're not trying to get... This is what was once called the politics of personal destruction. And it is the only tactic that the left really has. Speaking of that, I believe we are staring down the potential extinction of the Democrat Party as we know it. They keep losing, have been on an 8-year losing streak. And their response to this losing streak is continue to double down, continue to engage in questionable electioneering, including fraudulent voting. They just don't get that the best way to win an election is appeal to what interests people. To get out ahead, and where there is a problem, offer a solution with which the people agree. Or champion a solution that they have already determined they want to see occur. They don't do that. Democrats, and particularly the progressive wing of the Democrat Party, doesn't give a rat's behind about the electorate. They only care about their agenda items. They care about homosexual rights. They care about LGBTQ, whatever alphabet soup there is to it now, making sure that they are considered ahead of people who do not have their mental disorder. And make no mistake, homosexuality is a mental disorder. It was simply taken out of the DSM because the American Psychiatric Association caved to homosexual pressure. Transgenderism is a mental disorder. Look it up. Nevertheless, there's climate change, whatever that is. Because back in the 70s, we were afraid of an ice age. And then more recently, we were afraid of global warming. And now I read someplace where we're going back the other way. It's not global warming, it's global cooling. These folks lie. And they lie because the way they make their money is by government grants to do research that accomplishes not much at all. And so the way to keep the money flowing is to tell big lies to get people all worked up so that the money will flow. Where's the ice age? And if we're in warming, how come the Antarctic ice sheet keeps growing? What's going? Anyway, back in June, to demonstrate that the Democrat Party really doesn't understand what's going on, there were a number of special elections for Congress because Democrats saw opportunities when Donald Trump pulled members of Congress into his cabinet. One of them was Tom Price, who was HHS Secretary until his own foolishness with private jets going around got him out, which was good for all involved. But the Democrats, in seeking to make this a referendum on Trump, showed that they were tone deaf about why they were even in a position to seek a referendum on Trump.
The much-hyped special election in Georgia's 6th congressional district has arrived. With all the overwrought fanfare of a political moon landing, a nationwide superlative contest, and who can resist those, is on full swing on cable news tonight. Just how important is this special election? Well, according to the people you're watching, it's literally everything. It's a definitive referendum on Donald Trump. It's D-Day for Trump. It's Trump's last stand. Okay. Deep breath, please. It is true that this election is partly about Donald Trump, and you can tell from the fundraising numbers, which are huge. This is the most expensive congressional race in American history. Almost all that money has come from angry liberals who live out of state. Marin County, Beverly Hills, Martha's Vineyard, that's who's paying for this contest. Democrat John Ossoff has outraised his opponent fully 7-1. Now, he's running a suburban district that voted only narrowly for Donald Trump back in November. His opponent, the Republican Karen Handel, may be a remarkably impressive person, but she has shown no signs of that so far. In other words, this should not be close. Ossoff ought to be running away with it, but as of right now, he's not. He may still win, but not by a huge margin. Why is that? Because Democrats still literally have no idea why they keep losing elections. If they did, they would have run a real candidate with a real job who understands the constituents he is attempting to represent. Instead, Democrats put up a 30-year-old semi-employed documentary filmmaker who can't even vote for himself because he doesn't live in the district. He's got a ton of trendy rich people positions on just about every topic. The abortion people love him. He's gravely concerned about climate and childhood obesity and the availability of organic kale. He thinks illegal aliens are noble. He went to the London School of Economics. He's super fit and way smarter than you are. We could go on and on. You've seen it all before. That's the point. Voters have seen it before, too. And outside of Brooklyn and the west side of L.A., they're not that into it.
There is the rub. They want people who represent certain issues in every district in America, in every elected office. What they are not interested in are people who have concern for the constituency of those jurisdictions. That's the problem. Progressives care about issues that America does not care about. And they care about them so much that when they get power, they ignore what the people desire so that they can pursue the objective or objectives on this agenda. And it is an anti-American agenda. It is an anti-liberty agenda. It is a population and public control agenda. And oh, by the way, they do wish to disarm you because they recognize as long as you have guns, you may kill them before you allow them to control you. Democrats do not get it yet, which is why they hemorrhaged over 1,000 elected office seats during the Obama administration. The Obama administration was a bloodbath for Democrats, and they haven't recovered. Now, I know we had the recent election where people are trying to say that we won the Virginia governorship and we won New Jersey. 2 states that Hillary Clinton carried, you won. You didn't make any new ground. You just didn't lose any more ground. The country is still solidly against the Democrat Party from an electoral standpoint. If you don't get it, you don't get it. One person who I know doesn't get it is April Ryan. She appeared with another clueless individual on CNN, that would be Don Lemon, trying to explain what was going on with Donald Trump and poll numbers.
April, let's talk about the president's approval rating. It stands at the lowest point overall. Just 36% say that they approve of the way Trump is handling his job as president. How does the White House explain those low poll numbers, which have been consistent throughout his presidency?
Well, they are very reactionary and deflective. They're blaming it on the Russia investigation. They're blaming it on Democrats. And it's interesting, Democrats who are trying to come up with some wins, particularly the gubernatorial races in New Jersey and Virginia, and they're blaming everything on the reactionary president for all the problems that we're having. But this president is trying to find his way out, and he's doubling down with his base. And when it comes time to talk to his base, to galvanize them, he hits with topics that really resonate with them. The Confederacy, issues of race. I mean, the NFL with taking a knee, or be it Charlottesville. This president knows what strikes the chord of the quote-unquote forgotten man, the uneducated or those who have not attended college, white male who feels that they're on the fringe and not touched by any form of government. And this president has reached out to them. So his numbers are low, but he keeps doubling down. But we've not seen kryptonite yet for this president to make him go out for the count. He continues to rebound some kind of way. But the question is, how often can he do this in the midst of this Russia investigation and just the divisions that's going on in this country?
Thank you, April. Thank you, David.
The issue is the American people believe that you're lying, April Ryan, Don Lemon, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, New York Times, Washington Post. They do not believe you. They believe Trump because Trump has said things and then done what he has said he would do. They believe him. The economy is better. And why is it that you never want to talk about that? You don't understand. You want to talk about polls. The same polling organizations that have Trump in the low 30s or wherever he is are the same ones that were holding a coronation for Hillary Clinton last November 8th. She was supposed to be ushered in with a massive landslide electorally. But now I'm supposed to believe you when you say his numbers are low. I don't. You want me to believe you when you say the Russia investigation that's been discounted by the American people over and over again. They're tired of it. You don't get it. These are the same people who, when 4 folks were dead in Benghazi, couldn't find a way to report on that despite all the information. Now we're still looking for evidence of Trump involvement with Russia or Russia collusion. There is no Russian collusion, but you have been looking for that for more than a year, but you couldn't find any evidence to show what happened to 4 Americans getting killed by terrorists in Libya. You really don't understand the American people. And until that changes, you have no hope of being anything other than a decreasing minority party, Democrats. Your agenda is anti-American, and that's why the American people keep rejecting you. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to my good friend, Ron Edwards, and after that, we'll be back with hour 2 of Black Man Thinkin'.
If you are a Trump-hating Rhino Republican who looks the other way when Democrats literally set out to destroy the Republic, prepare to be booted out of office. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards. On today's page from the Edwards Notebook, President Trump clearly stated that the corporate tax rate must be lowered now to make America once again competitive on the world's economic stage. The president even caved in to the globalists and settled at a 20% rate. But now, Republicans are seriously considering a 1-year delay before cutting the corporate rate. The Republicans are also trying to gum up the works by not issuing across-the-board tax reductions, despite knowing that such measures could cause a repeat of 1981, when selfish politicians delayed tax reductions for a year and caused a recession. President Reagan agonized over the decision to give in to the statist politicians who persuaded him not to oppose their delay of granting tax relief for the people of America. I pray that Republicans will awaken from their stupor of pretending not to understand that tax cuts bring in more revenue and the wasteful spending must be curtailed. For you Trump haters, he is doing his job, and it is past time you do yours, or prepare to be booted out of office. I'm Ron Edwards.
Sponsored by the Tri-County Liberty Coalition.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Men Thinkin'.
Freedom is never more than 1 generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you are dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy with Hour 2 of Black Man Thinkin on the dominant force of internet conservatism. TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Just going back to the last segment in the previous hour, the thing that is most strange to me about Democrats and their cluelessness about why they're losing is that they honestly think that they can insult their way into victory. And by insulting, I'm not talking about their opponents. They want to keep insulting the voters. They keep telling the voters, you're stupid not to vote for us, as though that's going to make them vote for you. Wow. Anyway, we're going to start Hour 2 talking about the black female problem. This is the problem in America. The problem in America. And I say this with all seriousness. If you fix the black female problem in America, then you will, by doing that alone, make most of the progress required to make America great again. What are we talking about? Well, what brought this to my attention is another Facebook friend of mine, Rasan Hall, posted a video by Tommy Sotomayor. And I'm not a big fan of Mr. Sotomayor because first of all, he's very profane. And I'm not into that. I just don't do that. And he, in my opinion, he seems to have all but forgotten or given up, really, just given up on the idea that America's blacks can ever be what they were. Now, I believe I'm older than Mr. Sotomayor, so I am still of the generation who saw blacks, quote unquote, at the height of their political powers in the last century. So I know what they're capable of. I know what they can do. And it doesn't require the things that many people are talking about today. It wasn't the educated blacks who made the change. It was those who simply were moral and committed. And moral does not mean saintly. It doesn't mean that everybody was in the church, because they clearly weren't. But they had a sense of good and evil, a sense of right and wrong, and they were not going to be swayed from it. He posted this video from Mr. Sotomayor where he showed two black females attacking the manager of a McDonald's through a drive-through window over chicken McNuggets that they say they did not receive, even though documented evidence was produced and shown to them by the manager that the reason you did not get them was because you neither ordered nor paid for them. And they attacked the man and basically said they're going to come back and they're going to air this place out, shoot it up and kill him, and all the different epithets that came out. You weak, be in, and all kinds of things. Mr. Sotomayor's point is black women are just out of control, and we should all know it. Had a black man, his assertion, made the equivalent of those terroristic threats, then the police would have probably been at that location. They would have been called to that location, and everybody would have been looking for them. But because black women did this, nobody seemed to mind. That's the problem in America right now. Black women are the least favored from any standpoint you want when compared to other demographics in things that build communities and families. And it's not that the anecdote, don't get me wrong, you can go into a trailer park in West Virginia or someplace and you can find white women acting out. You can go into different Latino communities in the United States and take a video camera and you can find Latino women acting out. You can find them. But here's what you're not going to find among anything other than black women. 72.3% illegitimacy rate, highest in the U.S. 13% of the population responsible for 35% of abortions. Highest per capita abortion rate in the U.S. So high that in New York City, more conceived children are killed in the womb than are allowed to emerge alive from it. No one else is doing this. Highest divorce rates among U.S. females, black women have. Lowest marriage rates among U.S. females, black women have. Highest STD infection rates of any U.S. group, male or female. It's been said, it's been printed, it's been challenged, it's been reiterated. The CDC has come out and said that fully 48% of black females in America between the ages of 15 and 44 or 15 and 49, one of those two ranges, 48% of them are infected with genital herpes. Nobody else is even close. The closest to them would be black males at half that rate, 24%. White people are well under 20%. Asians, forget about it. Highest rate of lesbianism among U.S. females. Please explain to me how, if your women will not bring children into a marriage situation, are more likely than any other to kill them in the womb, are more likely to be in broken marriages, least likely to even be in marriages, have astronomical rates of sexually transmitted disease infection, and are more likely than any other woman in America to not even want to be with a man. Can someone explain to me how that's not a problem? How that is not, and I put this with all seriousness, how that is not an existential problem for any people. Any people. And it happens to be the case among black people. Interestingly to me, instead of being horrified by these data, and these were not indicative of black females when I was growing up. This is not who black women were. And if you go further back into not maybe the decade before I was born, going into the 50s and maybe into the late 40s, as tough a time as blacks had, black women were thought of with a certain level of regard for their character. Let's not forget, it was the character of Rosa Parks that launched a bus boycott that turned into a movement. We didn't have someone who was full of sexually transmitted disease and wasn't married and lesbian. No, you had that woman. And Rosa Parks was not some anomaly. Had she been thought of as some anomaly not representative of black females, there would have been no bus boycott. Simple as that. We went from that woman to someone jumping through the drive-through window at a McDonald's to beat somebody up over chicken nuggets that you didn't even order. That's a problem. Now, before we get into this inevitable nonsense, what about the black man? You don't get it. You neutered the black man as soon as you signed on to the war on poverty. Because as soon as you signed on to the war on poverty, you signed up for the notion that we as a nation would pay the black female to separate the black man from his children, and you put the black man in an untenable position at that time. If I stay with my family, we're not going to have the same amount of food as if I leave. And you're telling that man, here is your choice. You stick together and struggle, or you separate and thrive, even though that is a Hobson's choice and a false choice. What was he supposed to do? Black women would usher their men out the back door when the social worker came in. But how does that look, to have a man running out of his own house because the government showed up? And then you can't even call it his house, because if you do, then the money drives up from the government. You want to blame men? Get out of here with that nonsense. It's not going to work with me. You want to take issue with men, you can. But when you have your women and federal and state governments working against your headship, your leadership in your own community, if you think that's not going to take a toll, I have a deed to a bridge in New York that I'd love for you to look at. It's crazy what was done. And when you talk about, well, all the things you're talking about with illegitimacy and abortion and all this other stuff, well, you know, it takes two to make a baby. True enough. And in these United States, with the laws the way they currently are, it only takes one to kill. And women do not have to consult with anyone to kill what's in their womb. And they don't. Repeat, it is almost unheard of for any woman in these United States to become or remain pregnant unless that is what she desires. So the idea that you would have 7 out of 10 children born out of wedlock, that's not the man's fault. That's the woman's choice. We're all about choice. Let's talk about what choice means. You choose to bring 7 out of 10 children here out of wedlock. You choose to kill 350,000 black children every year in the womb, and more than 17 million since 1973. That is why blacks are no longer the largest quote-unquote minority in these United States. You killed 17 million, and were they here, they would represent much more than 17 million in this population. But you didn't do that. You complained when the CDC came out and said nearly 1 of every 2 women was infected with genital herpes, and you screamed and you jumped up and down and you stomped your feet, and they doubled down. This is what the data shows. But again, instead of being horrified by this data instead of taking a knee for this data, instead of voicing their First Amendment rights to address these problems? No. We want to talk about a phantom police brutality epidemic. There is no epidemic of police brutality in this nation. There is not. 1.5% of all contact between police and the public result in the threat or use of violence, force. Only 1.5%. You have to include threats and use to get to 1.5%. Whites die at 2 to 3 times the rate of blacks at the hands of law enforcement. Whites have 7 times the contact with law enforcement that blacks have. And remember, they do outnumber blacks 5 to 1, but they have 7 times the number of contacts. They are more than twice as likely to encounter the threat or use of force, and they die. Let me put it to you this way. If you decided to publish and report in the same way whites dying at the hands of police, and you said, you know what, we're going to take every one of these cases and give it a day, then you would never report on blacks being killed by police, because there's more whites being killed by police than there are days in the year, and that's not the same for blacks. It's just not. But we are focused on that. The power of the Ku Klux Klan, which only has 8,000 members maximum, maybe closer to 5,000 in the entire country, and they ain't done anything to a black person since 1981. And oh, by the way, Jeff Sessions made sure that person got the death penalty. But he's racist, remember that. We are talking about, well, we got to deal with white privilege. Oh, those same white privilege that did not keep Barack Hussein Obama from being president of the United States for 2 terms. Though there were plenty of white people who were available to take the role, and there's one in there now. That white privilege. That's what you're focused on. Or the inherent racism in the poem that became the national anthem. That's your big deal. Are you serious? That's your big deal? Your women are destroying your community. They are destroying your people. And instead of that, you're talking about what white people are doing when none of the things that are happening to your community have a doggone thing to do with white people. Illegitimacy doesn't have anything to do with white people. Abortion, white people aren't putting guns to black women's heads saying kill your kid in the womb. Divorce, they're divorcing black men. White men ain't making them do that. They're not marrying anybody. If you're trying to say that the white man is giving them herpes, then how come white male herpes infection rate is less than 1/3 of that of the black woman? And no matter how you feel about homosexuality, homosexuality has never benefited any community. I don't have anything against homosexuals. If that's the way you want to roll, that's the way you roll. But it is horrific for a community to support it in any way, shape, or form. You don't. Those who go that way, they go that way. But you don't support it. You don't, well, we don't want them to feel. I don't care how they feel. I care about whether or not a people thrive. And homosexuality has never built, supported, or maintained any community. It doesn't do that. It does not. So we don't care about the real problems. We don't. It's interesting to me. Booker T. Washington once said, and he's talking about black leaders, and this quote is true, there is a class of colored people who make a business of keeping the troubles, the wrongs, and the hardships of the Negro race before the public. Some of these people do not want the Negro to lose his grievances because they do not want to lose their jobs. There's a certain class of race problem solvers who don't want the patient to get well. You know what? There's now another class who ignores the real problems of the patient to ensure that he remains sick. Well, and then you have the deflectors. What about the black man? You know what? If black women took care of their business, we wouldn't really have an issue with black men. Or at least it would get resolved. Because if women got their act together, they would do for black men the one thing above all else that needs to be done. You cannot make a man out of a male until you put family pressure on him to lead. A man needs burdens. Otherwise, he'll always be a boy. We have a black female problem in America that affects the whole country. Because whether you like it or not, whether you believe it or not, as goes the morality of black people in this country, so goes the morality of the American nation. You need to change this. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1, FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5, North Florida Talk Radio, Freedom in America Radio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. You know, part of the and I'm finding myself going back into prior segments. What you really have is, with black women, you just don't have the proper moral structure anymore to support a moral black man. Not as a group. And because of that, that's why it's such a problem for black people. But we want to talk about, or I want to talk about, how a good father, a good dad, actually is ending up not serving his talented son very well. And by that I'm speaking of LeAngelo Ball, freshman basketball player at UCLA. You may have heard this already, but here is how this past Thursday, I believe it was, ESPN reported the events surrounding Mr. Ball and two other freshman players for UCLA on their trip to China, which was supposed to be the beginning of the basketball season in a game with Georgia Tech.
3 UCLA men's basketball players, including LeAngelo Ball, younger brother of Lonzo, and second son of LeVar, along with freshmen Cody Riley and Jalen Hill, were arrested on shoplifting charges in China ahead of Friday's season-opening game against Georgia Tech in Shanghai. UCLA released a statement saying, "We are aware of a situation involving UCLA student-athletes in China. The university is cooperating fully with local authorities on this matter, and we have no further comment at this time." Jeff Goodman, what can you tell us in addition to that as the man who broke this story?
Well, Jello Ball is the middle son of LeVar Ball. He's a freshman at UCLA. I actually sat down with him about 10 days ago, and they're on that trip in China where they're going to play against Georgia Tech on Friday. And I was told by a source that those three players, all freshmen, were arrested after stealing from a Louis Vuitton store right next to their team hotel. And basically what happened was about 20 police officers stormed into the team hotel at about 8 in the morning, yesterday morning, interrogated the players from both Georgia Tech, 3 players, UCLA, 3 players, for hours, wouldn't let any of the coaches in, and basically used some strong words of, hey, if you don't tell us the truth, you are not going back home. So eventually UCLA, I was told, their players did tell them the truth, and they were arrested, and it will be interesting to see what happens to those players, and if they, certainly they're not going to play Friday night, but the bigger issue they have is how long they're going to be in jail and when they're going to be able to go home.
So they're currently being held. They're in jail right now in China.
They were, well, as of now, again, it's the middle of the night. It's actually early in the morning right now. So as of a couple hours ago, I was told they were being held And again, it'll be interesting to see kind of what happens next with these guys. And LeVar Ball scheduled to go out for this trip to see his son play his first college game at UCLA. I've tried to call LeVar and haven't been able to get a hold of him yet, but it'll, again, this is kind of a crazy situation, because if you get caught here, it's one thing. If you get caught stealing in China, who knows what's going to happen to these kids?
Indeed. Who does know what's going to happen to these players? Here's my problem with this. You don't get into these situations, even as a young person, if you have been taught the right values. Now, I know what people are going to say. You're trying to say, no, I do not think LeVar Ball is a bad father. But I do think there's some issues with the value system. Because the whole idea is for them to make money through basketball, a lot of money. And I'm sure they're going to have the requisite foundations where money is going into the community. And let me hit that in the head real quick. All the money that black people who are wealthy are funneling back into the community, please explain to me how that has stopped the body count that is coming out of the black community in places like Chicago, Detroit, Milwaukee, Miami, Los Angeles, Boston, Atlanta, you name it, Detroit, Baltimore. Where's all this foundation money in simply keeping people alive who are black? It doesn't seem to change. I'm sure there's plenty of foundation money in Chicago, and they're setting homicide records. So miss me with that. That's tokenism. It's just tokenism. I really care because I put my money there. I'm LeBron James and I put kids through school. Really? Has that done anything about teenage pregnancy? The rate of abortion? Has it done anything about sexually transmitted diseases? Has anybody's money addressed any of the problems that are going on in the black community? The answer is a resounding no. You want to know what fixes these problems? You fix these problems by teaching boys the values that manhood requires. And the values that manhood requires do not include how to shoot a step back three, how to drive to the bucket with authority, how to take it to the cup. Doesn't include that. How to be a shutdown defense doesn't include that. And this is where women could come in on this. Because, see, when I was growing up, if a young man was doing well, getting a degree or whatever, getting ready to play ball and all this other thing, the older women would come around and they would smile. They would be as proud as they could be. And I mean sincerely, they would be proud. And then they would start in, so when you going to get married? When you going to start a family? Because, see, those women understood. We know what happens with men who, when they get to the point where they think they've arrived and there's nobody with them, they cut the fool. Well, you're too young to get married. No. You don't understand. You cannot make a male into a man until the pressure of family, whether a spouse or a spouse and children, are upon him. And the only thing you're going to do when you give him the power of success, the old saying is still true. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The scriptures are true. The love of money is the root of all evil. And the one thing you can say that is apparent about what's going on with the Ball family is a very strong affection for money. Do not get me wrong. They're not doing anything illegal. But they're not building anything either. And they're definitely not building character. Again, do not misunderstand. LeAngelo Ball and his two cohorts could have done this crazy thing no matter who their parents were or anything else. But see, if you are the father of a son who has the profile of the Ball family, you need to hold them to a higher standard. You can't run with everybody else because you are not like everybody else. You have to carry yourself a different way. And if the folks you're hanging with can't get with that program, they can't be with you. To the extent that any of these other two gentlemen got him to thinking that what he was doing was okay, that's a major problem right there. You allowed yourself to be influenced. I don't believe that LeVar Ball is a bad person. I know that there are people who have negative opinions about him. He's him. But something got missed on the transmission where, given his position, given everything that was involved for LeAngelo Ball, he looked at that situation and honestly believed that he could get away with larceny. And if you walk, and remember, this wasn't one store, this was 3 stores. 3 different stores. You had to go into one store and steal, and then go into another store and a third store. And the time for all that, well, it could happen to anybody. Well, it didn't happen to the Georgia Tech players. Didn't happen to anybody else on the UCLA roster. Only these 3. I don't care if it was fear or anything else that would have stopped them. Something should have stopped them, and it didn't. As a result, they didn't play the game as they were expected to. So this affects the university because now they're down 3 players. They're not coming back. By the way, UCLA played on Friday night, and they returned on Saturday night without those 3 players, including LeAngelo Ball.
Where did you learn this? How did you learn this? And take us through the whole thing, please.
Well, I've been on the ground in China with the team since they arrived here. We got to Hangzhou first and then to Shanghai, and so really been following this throughout the process. The players were arrested and let out on bail. They were arrested Tuesday, let out on bail Wednesday morning, have been in Hangzhou since then, and they will remain there, according to my sources, for a week or 2. Again, no one knows exactly when the legal process will play out, when they will be allowed to return home. What we do know for certain right now is the team is returning home Saturday night, and they will not be on that flight. So how long they will be in Hangzhou is still kind of up in the air. But according to my sources, who has been, pretty much following this throughout and is, tracking the investigation, it looks like they will be there for a week or 2.
Are they being allowed to be visited by their own people, whether it's their family, attorneys, UCLA personnel, or are they in isolation more or less?
No, they are staying at a luxury, 5-star hotel on the lake in Hangzhou. They are allowed to see visitors. They're allowed to go to, the spa, the pool, the restaurant. If they even want to go across the street to grab something to eat, that they can. There's no guards there patrolling it. There is a UCLA representative with them. From all accounts, as tough a situation as this has been handled professionally by all parties. But yes, they can't see people. I saw LeVar and LaMelo visit LiAngelo on Thursday. UCLA athletic director Dan Guerrero came to see the players on Friday. Again, they've really worked diligently to try to get them to come back on that team flight Saturday night. That just won't happen. The legal process will not be done by then. They are cautiously optimistic that it won't take that much longer. But again, according to my sources, it could take a week or two.
A week or two. Maybe longer. Nobody knows. But none of that is the point. The point is that they stole. Consequences come from actions. So trying to figure out whether or not the Chinese are right or what's going to happen. Look, to be honest with you, scholarships are probably going to get pulled. You just embarrassed the university with the equivalent of an international incident that kept you from playing and kept the university in the spotlight in a negative footing for all this time. You took a trip that was supposed to celebrate American basketball and made it about your theft. I don't think they're going to ever play for UCLA again. I don't think they're going to keep their scholarships. I could be wrong. I don't think it's good if I am wrong. I don't think LeVar Ball intentionally did anything with the intent of harming his son. I don't believe that. But he's going out there saying that committing grand larceny in a foreign country is no big deal. I can only imagine that he says that, at least in part, because that's what he believes. And to the extent that is what he believes, he has failed his son. For what it's worth, and I don't know, his mother is not a black woman. And from what I understand, his mother has health issues. This much I know, having been raised by a black woman. I would have been more afraid of being seen on video putting something that didn't belong to me in my pocket and having my mama find out about it than being worried about the police. And it wouldn't have mattered who was there with me. My father was not an extremely demonstrative man. He had his say when he needed to. What he had was my mother's back, and my mother would go after you. And she made it clear what her expectations were up front. What LeVar Ball has said indicates to me that I don't think those standards were set, and that's a failure. I am heartbroken that this happened. And I don't think that any good can come of it unless the consequences are severe enough to set an example, not for LeVar Ball, but for everybody else who thinks talent is more important than character. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us, also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5, North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of the show. We have been hearing that tax reform is on its way, and even now we have competing bills in the House and Senate moving forward toward passing. I think the House bill is passed out of committee, which means there should be a vote on it relatively soon. And the Senate will be discussing, voting, doing whatever it is they're going to do. But the frameworks for both forms of tax reform, if you want to call it that, have been laid out by both chambers. Now, one thing that gets to me, because you have to understand the disingenuousness of all of this. Back in April of this year, Speaker Paul Ryan went through the trouble to produce this wonderful bit of marketing.
Imagine for a moment if you could file your taxes on the form the size of a postcard. Wouldn't that be something? This is one of the things we're working on right now. For too long, we have had a tax code that no one really understands. Long and complicated forms are only part of the story. If you're a family trying to pay for college tuition, you have to wade through more than a dozen different tax provisions and almost 100 pages of IRS instructions just to figure it out. Even the word married takes 218 words in 5 paragraphs to define. It's crazy. I know marriage can be complicated, but that's a little ridiculous. So it's no wonder many of us just end up paying someone else to do our taxes and just hope for the best. But it shouldn't be like that. Our tax code should work for us and not against us. And the same goes for the IRS. Let's make the tax code and tax day itself simpler for all Americans.
Of course, they're not doing that. The idea of making the tax form simpler doesn't necessarily reform taxes at all. Tax reform is about changing the rates, specifically in this country, about reducing the amount of percentage that Americans give to the government. That's really that simple. I don't care how big the form is. The UK and Japan, for example, have basically done away with tax forms with a process that they call precision withholding, where they really don't file anything. They have it all figured out from the outset. This is what you're going to pay. We're going to withhold that and no more, no less. And you just keep on trucking as though nothing's happening. I'm not advocating for that, by the way. I believe it is extremely important for people to see and to experience the real pain of having the government extract their money. I don't believe in any withholding. I believe you should get a bill, because if you get a bill, you will actually think about this the way that you should. When you get withholdings, you just, well, you know, you never saw it. You never realized how bad it was. When you get a bill, then you start to understand what taxation is about. The other thing is now, of course, the Republicans tripping all over themselves. Remember, we saw the campaign talk about tax reform from the outset with Trump. Trump was never shy about saying that there was going to be tax reform, that there needed to be tax reform. But the same people who couldn't have an Obamacare repeal bill ready to go on day one, even though they had been campaigning against Obamacare to repeal it for 7 years, but they couldn't get an Obamacare repeal bill ready, and they still haven't, were even less prepared to do anything about tax reform, even though that was also on the campaign promise docket, including their campaign promise docket. There's really not tax reform going on at all. This is continuation of the social engineering that's always been going on since there was a tax code. For example, but just to be fair, Newsy went out and took a look at the tax plans and from the House and Senate and made this comparison.
Senate Republicans unveiled a new tax plan Thursday as the party looks for its first major legislative victory this year. This is separate from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act plan House Republicans released last week. That bill passed out of committee Thursday. The Senate bill keeps 7 individual tax brackets and lowers the current top rate just a little to 38.5%. The House bill pushes for 4 tax brackets, but keeps the top bracket at 39.6%. The Senate version also restores some key deductions for things like medical bills and student loan interest, which the House bill cut. The Senate GOP's plan wants to boost the child tax credit to $1,650. That's $50 more than the House proposal and over 60% greater than the current law. One potentially contentious difference between the two bills is the approach to the corporate tax rate. Both bills propose reducing the corporate tax rate to 20%. The Senate bill delays that change until 2019. The House bill puts the lower tax rate in place next year, which is what President Donald Trump wants. Both the House and Senate proposals will likely undergo changes. If both bills pass their respective chambers, lawmakers will have to reconcile the differences and agree on the same bill before it would reach the president's desk.
Do you remember all the discussion about this is our first chance at tax reform in 30 years? Now remember, the Bush tax cuts of last decade weren't really reform. There wasn't an overhauling of the tax code. There was simply a reduction in rates, which, despite what everybody wants to say and talk about with regard to the Great Recession, which the Bush tax cuts did not precipitate, those reductions increased revenues. Of course, the thing that they never tell you is the lower tax rates are, up to a point, of course, the more revenue the government gets. They always seem to take that out. But if you go back 30 years ago, you know what tax reform left us with? Under Ronald Reagan, you know what you had? You had 2 tax brackets. 2. Count them. 2. 15%, 28%. That was it. If you made less than $30,000, you paid 15%. If you made more than $30,000, you paid 28%. Game over. That was tax reform. Do you remember what happened to the economy under Ronald Reagan? Do you remember the erasure of double-digit unemployment, double-digit inflation, double-digit federal interest rates, That happened because you actually said, we are going to make it simpler. There aren't going to be 4, 7, 10, 12, however many. There's 2 tax brackets. We're not going to go through all these changes about, well, who's going to get this benefit because they have children? Who's going to get? We're simply cutting the rates. The rates were the same whether you were married, filing jointly, married, filing separately, single, or head of household. The rates were the same. The only difference was when you changed over from the 15 to the 28. That was it. We're not doing that anymore. Why you say that? Well, because the House has 4 tax brackets, and where the Reagan tax cuts took the top rate down to 28%, the House has the top rate of 38.5%. No, actually, the House is 39.6%, almost 40%. Much greater than when we last had tax reform. The Senate keeps 7 tax brackets, and the top rate is 38.5%. You keep trying to tell me this is tax reform. It's not tax reform. This is social engineering. This is them continuing to keep their foot on your neck. Why? Well, we have the child tax credit. Why? What difference does it make to the federal government if you have children? What does that have to do with how they need to raise money, whether or not you have children? The idea is real simple. The federal government needs to reduce rates. Every time they've done it, whether it's the 1920s, whether the 1960s, the 1980s, or the 2000s, when rates came down, revenues went up. If you know that, it's true, it's empirical, it's proven, it's never changed. Why in the world are we dancing around with the idea of, well, here's how we're going to handle student loan debt, cut the rates. Here's how we're going to handle the marriage, cut the rates. The answer to everything, cut the rates. You have a blueprint. It was 1980s. It didn't go back up until after Bush 41 lied through his teeth when he said, read my lips. And next thing you know, you went from 2 tax brackets to 3, and now we're back up to... Guys, we're just doing this wrong. They're lying to you. This is very simple. They cannot stand the prospect of you being in control of your own money. They can't stand the prospect of not being able to dictate how you live your lives. Therefore, they want progressive taxation, which is inherently unfair. They want to talk about, well, if you do this, we won't take as much money. So they're basically dictating to you. In a free society, the government is dictating to you how to live your lives so you can avoid them taking your money. Really? That's social engineering. This isn't tax reform. And this Republican Party, and let me make sure you understand this. I don't think Donald Trump is better than any of them, because he hasn't figured this out either, or he's not willing to pursue it. The idea that some people should pay more. No. The idea is real simple. Come up with a fair rate, which is going to be lower for everybody. You ought to come up with a single rate. God can run the church on 10%. Why do I need 5 and 7 tax brackets in order to run the federal government? And guess what? The church ain't in debt. And that's our show. God bless you. God keep you. Do something about these folks lying through their teeth to you. Put them out. Put them in. And stop thinking everything that benefits you has to be some tremendous legislative heavy lift that no one can do. Then find someone who can. Take every naysayer and replace them with someone who has a can-do attitude, and watch your country change. Until next week, may God bless and keep you. Do take care.
You've been listening to Black Man Thinkin' with your host, Stan Levy. Join Stan midnight to 2 a.m. That's late Monday night into early Tuesday morning. And find him on the web at Black Man Thinkin' without the G. That's blackmanthinkin.com.